Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another live broadcast of SRS Review podcast. Um, as you all know by now, I'm Mr. Murray, and today we're going to be talking about fifth grade, chapter 12 review. Now, quick disclaimer like I do with all of my live videos, I do live in a kind of noisy neighborhood, so anything you hear coming from outside, it's not endorsed by me in any way, shape, or form. So if you hear something that you shouldn't hear, I first and foremost would like to apologize for that, and you might hear a little squeaking kind of like that. My chair is just that way. This is going to be a rather quick version of the live broadcast because at 7 p.m. I have the sixth grade broadcast. So you guys all know the drill by now. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into it, okay? So um, you have 16 questions on your review. And remember, any questions that you may have, please hold them until the end of the review. That way I can address them all. All right, so question number one, actually 1 through 3, you're going to see a different little kind of like a box going like that, where you just have to write everything in. Number one is Nat Turner's Rebellion. Now, with Nat Turner's Rebellion, what you're going to want to do is remember that Nat Turner was an enslaved person who began the rebellion against slavery in Virginia. The whole context of the Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, is the North and the South. They simply cannot get together in terms of slavery. The North is opposing while the South wants slavery, and that's the biggest issue. Um, Number two would be the attack on Harper's Ferry. Um, that took place in 1859. You have John Brown leading an attack on the U.S. Army post in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, hoping to begin a rebellion against slavery. So we already see with number one and number two, Nat Turner's rebellion and the attack on Harper's Ferry, that rebellions are going to become quite common when trying to get rid of slavery in the early United States. Last but not least, we have the attack on Fort Sumter. Um, this is a couple years later, where you see the South basically developing their own version of the United States and calling themselves the Confederate States. Um, and that's when you have the Confederate government stating that they are going to attack the federal fort, which happens to be Fort Sumter. And this is essentially the battle that begins the Civil War. Okay. Um, Now I see my viewer counts going up and down, dropping left and right. Um, so if you can hear me, but the picture's not moving, all you have to do is simply refresh and you'll be right back in. And even if you don't get all this information right now, don't worry, I'm still going to go over it with you tomorrow. You guys have that um, extra help, I guess, in that sense, since I'm unable to have the reviews tomorrow, at least the podcast reviews, that is. All right, number four. So, what happened to slavery as states grew more cotton? Well, if you have more cotton being grown, you're going to need someone to tend to that cotton. So, you're going to see a lot of plantation owners using more enslaved African Americans as a result. Um, Once again, we see this cruel, cruel system of slavery just building and building in power in terms of making these African Americans work against their will and giving them the worst living conditions possible. Number five, what effect did Nat Turner's rebellion have on Southerners and their opinion of freedom for African Americans? You're going to start to see Southerners passing laws to control both enslaved and free African Americans. And what does that necessarily mean? Well, there are certain laws that state, well, even if you're free, you have to be held tighter in the sense that we're not going to let you truly be free. And then if you're still a slave, well, we're just going to crack down on you even more. So basically, they were already living a harsh life, but it just got even worse for them, which I go back to it time and time again. It's just really unfortunate. Seeing as how Britain did the same thing to the American Indians, we're doing the same thing to African Americans. So we try to be apart from them, yet we do the same things. Um, Big time hypocrites there, but it is what it is, and Eventually, we'll learn that it's wrong, but for the time being, we have to pretend like we don't know what's going to happen. That way, we can just learn a little bit more. So, they still believe that slavery was necessary, even though there have these strict laws that state the free slaves have more freedom, once more, if you want to call it that, and the actual slaves are being cracked down harder. Slavery is still necessary. Of course, we're going to make their lives the worst they could possibly can, and we're going to work them as hard as we can, but slavery is slavery, and we need it. And no, it's not wrong. That's just the way the South thought. So, we're taking a look at number 6 now. What were the results of the Kansas-Nebraska Act? Now, remember, if I'm not mistaken, it was in lesson 3. You have the maps that you can take a look at um, to see the Nebraska territory, which is up top, and the Kansas territory, which is on the bottom of that. Basically, the act recognized the right to vote on slavery in Kansas and Nebraska territories, so they get the opportunity to vote on slavery. Settlers supporting and opposing slavery fought each other. Kansas ends up joining the Union as a free state as a result. So remember, the big issue with the Union is that if the South were to acquire Nebraska and Kansas, that would essentially barricade. Let me go the other way. Barricade on the map. Oh, no, this way. Barricade on the map going this way. You have all the southern states down here, and the northern states would be stuck up here. Remember, sorry guys, it's backwards. So if I'm trying to go to the right, I'm actually going to the left. But if I'm going to the left, I'm going to the right. That's just the way it looks on camera. Um, but yes, they would basically be controlling the north and pushing them. There you go, as far back as they possibly could. Number 7, how did the Underground Railroad help people escape slavery? The Underground Railroad was very important to slavery. It helped enslaved people escape to the north, which would be Canada, or in some cases to Florida, Mexico, or the Caribbean. Okay. Um, Honestly, more people could have been saved with the Underground Railroad, but at the same time, like I was telling you, if one of the slaves was killed or their owners had them removed, they would simply find another slave to take their place. It was a cruel and a cruel system. Kind of like if you have, let's say, for example, a bottle. Right? You have a bottle, you drink everything in here. What are you going to do if you're thirsty? You're going to go get another bottle. They're easily disposable. You really don't care and think about that one bottle in particular. Same thing as they were doing with these slaves. They really didn't care for them. They were a bottle that they can easily toss away and just get another. And it's a different metaphor, but you get what I'm saying. It's property, something that can easily be replaced. Um, but these Southerners weren't thinking of them as people, they were thinking of them as property, and that is the key to understanding the Southern mentality. Number 8, why were many Southerners unhappy when Abraham Lincoln was president? Well, simply put, Lincoln was the only candidate against slavery. Now, remember, he was born in a slave state. There are some people who claim that he did have slaves. To be completely honest with you, right off the top of my head, if I'm not mistaken, the family did have slaves, but they instead learned the errors of their way and moved on. That I can find out more information for you guys later. But um, many people in the South feared that having Abraham Lincoln in power would make the federal government stronger and eventually put an end to slavery. Now, when we think about it in when we think about it in this context, also remember that Abraham Lincoln said that there's nothing really in the Constitution that can prevent him from actually abolishing slavery or anything against slavery. He would just do his best to ensure that getting rid of slavery was a slow, steady process, not something that could be just ousted really quick. He wanted to make sure he had the right building blocks to get rid of it slowly but surely so that it would never return. Kind of like treatments. If you have weeds or insects, you have to spray a couple of times, let them come back, spray a little bit more, get rid of them slowly but surely, and then eventually the problem would be gone. In this case, he's just giving a mental cleanse of the mentality of the Southerners to stop utilizing slavery. So, number 9. In some territories, settlers had popular sovereignty and decided for themselves whether to allow slavery. 10. When Congress passed a tariff, people had to pay higher prices for imported goods. And last but not least, 11. An escaped slave was called a fugitive. So, popular sovereignty, tariff, and fugitive. So, and we jump to the next page, and we're on page 449 now. And if you look, you have two graphs. You have a population line graph from 1830 to 1860, and then you have a population bar graph of the year 1830. Now, note, you have the years as well as the population in millions for your line graph. And I'm sorry, yes, for your line graph. And for your bar graph, you have population as well as region. Okay. You will have something exactly like this on your test, so it's good to get this mentally in your mind that you're going to see something again like this. Okay. It'll be the same way next year when you all are in sixth grade. Okay. Exact same style. Your study guide and the little additional teaching, you'll have these things on the test, even though, excuse me, it doesn't pop up every single day. It's still important to learn. So, which statement is the most accurate? And that would be the letter D, as in dog. The number of African Americans in the South was greater than in the North. So, realistically, what graph would you look at for that? Very simple. You would look at the bar graph. And how can you tell? Well, staggering numbers between the South and the North. This would be the North, this would be the South. Okay. Um, you look at A, the number of African Americans in the North grew quickly. Well, right off the bat, we're talking about North and South, so we can kind of look away from the line graph with the years and just focus on the North and South. So all of these are talking about the bar graph. Now, what do the two graphs have in common? Well, let's think about it. You go up and you look at the top where it says, use the graphs about African American population before the Civil War to answer each question. Well, right then and there, if you know graphs give you data, and we're talking about African American population before the Civil War, your answer would be that they are graphs giving data talking about African American population before the Civil War. Sometimes the answers are right in front of you, and you just got to read, you got to look. Don't second guess yourself or overthink it. I do that a lot. It's my downfall, but if you can get that mental image in your mind that, hey, it could be right there, you're set. Now, number 14, different economies of the North, and I'm sorry, what were the causes of sectionalism in the United States? Basically, you have different economies in the North and different economies in the South, and you're also going to have arguments about slavery. Those were the biggest issues. I mean, the biggest issues. You have arguing over whose money is better, but our money means more, but your money doesn't mean this, your money doesn't mean that. It's just discrepancies left and right. And then you're also going to have to worry about slavery and tariffs. Um, Remember, guys, slavery was a big issue. It was the biggest issue. And then also having to bring in and get taxed extra with these tariffs, it just made everything worse. Number 15, in what way was Abraham Lincoln's view of slavery different from that of Stephen Douglas? Well, Lincoln believed that the United States could not survive if divided by slavery. He thought that the country could be divided into slave and free states. So, realistically, Abraham Lincoln does state that a house divided against itself cannot stand. So, we see here if the North and the South continue to fight about slavery and not come to a general agreement, then this is what's going to happen. We're going to break apart. He doesn't want that. He tried for peaceful resolution. Unfortunately, the peace did not come. And number 16, which events took place during the 1850s? And that would be your timeline question that you see at the top of page 449. Uncle Tom's Cabin was written, and John Brown's raid occurred. Uncle Tom's Cabin was written in 1852, whereas John Brown's raid was in 1859. So, with that being said, we have 10 minutes, and it worked perfect. At this time, I will take any questions that you all have. Just put it, nope, this way. Put it in the chat box right here. Any questions you may have in regards to what you need to know, things you are not confident about. So let's go ahead and do that. 10 minutes start now. I'll provide you all with some music to prevent any awkward silence. Okay, so our first question is, how many questions on the test? Let me go ahead and get that for you. There will be a total of 18 questions on the test. Thank you for that question. Second question, are there any trick questions? Let me see. Well, your first 4 questions are going to be vocabulary, and you're going to make sure, let me turn down your music just a little bit. You're going to need to make sure that you can match the word with the actual definition, so that helps there. The next 4 questions, you'll have multiple choice. 9 and 10, as always, are going to be questions where you have to read a passage and then answer either short answer or multiple choice. This time it's multiple choice. 11 will be a short answer. The part that might confuse you, pay attention to graphs, understand how the graphs work. If I have to guess on a trick question, it would definitely be 12 through 14, where you just have to really define these graphs, okay? You're also going to have a paragraph question. I expect the usual 4 to 5 sentences. If you can't provide 4 to 5 sentences, I can't give you full credit, guys, okay? And then last but not least, 16 through 17, those are going to be the questions that require a short response, typically 2 sentences each, and then the extended response, you'll have room on the back of your test. You're going to write, once again, another journal that needs to be at least 6 to 8 sentences. Multiple choice, yes. You will have 6 multiple choice questions. Oh, not a problem. If you have any more questions, go ahead and keep on shooting them through. Oh, not a problem.
Come true. Will you accept the apology that is long overdue? Well, I question what forever is, and I know you do too. When the answer's right in front of me.
Yes, this chapter will be touching on all points of chapter 12. That's it. Your final is just chapter 12, nothing else you have to worry about. Good question. Thank you for that one. Technically, okay, so the question is, any questions that involve maps? Technically, no. But if you consider graphs to be, maps in a sense, then yes. Just pay close attention to those maps on the study guide. I'm not saying that they're exact. You're going to have 3 different ones you need to look at. You're going to have a bar graph, you're going to have a pie graph, and you're also going to have a line graph. But they all have something in common. And I can't say any more about those because I'd technically start to give away some of the questions, and I don't want to do that. Will it ask about the attack on Fort Sumter? Yes, you'll have at least one question there. Can't give you the specifics, but yeah, yes, you will have at least one question that asks you about the attack on Fort Sumter.
Believe it's all I wanna do. Believe it's all I wanna do.
Okay, we're coming in with 5 minutes left for the 5th grade version of SRS podcast review. I'm sorry, SRS review podcast. That's initially what I wanted to call it, SRS podcast review, but then review podcast just sounds much nicer. Will it ask about Lincoln's campaigns? It will not specifically ask about campaigns, but it will, it's good to know his views. What I mean by views, it's good to know how Lincoln feels about everything going forth in terms of slavery. Good question. Okay, so will it ask questions on Harper's Ferry? It's not specific to Harper's Ferry, but it's good to know about the rebellions. I know that's a little vague, but can't give away everything. But yes, you're going to have to at least know about the rebellions. We got 3 more minutes left. Will it talk about Dred Scott? Yes, it will contain Dred Scott. Could I repeat? Number 3, of course. Number 3 was talking about the attack on Fort Sumter. Basically, you have the Confederate States coming together and stating that, well, the North is not going to take our demand seriously, so what we're going to do is we're going to physically attack Fort Sumter. There was a 34-hour raid in which they were firing cannons until they actually surrendered, and that began the Civil War. Good question.